The government promises to fix up newly passed right to disconnect laws to shield employers from criminal penalties. A toxic smoke warning for residents in Briana after a massive factory fire. The WA government rejects plans to protect mature trees, saying its primary focus is to boost housing stocks. And a fiery Joe Biden hits out at criticism of his memory in the classified documents case. Good evening, Briana Shepherd with ABC News. The government says it will tweak its own industrial relations legislation to ensure employers don't face criminal penalties over the right to disconnect. The bill was passed without removing that threat after it failed to secure enough support to fix the problem in the Senate.
The matter is resolved in the affirmative. I call the clerk.
A legislative stuff-up still causing confusion.
There's fines in the Act. There's been fines in the Act since, 1907.
How is it likely that fines will be handed out? How likely is it?
None if the Liberals get out of the way.
The government's been forced to admit a bungle in legislating a right for workers not to have to respond to calls, texts and emails outside of work hours, leaving open the possibility employers could be subject to criminal penalties if they repeatedly breach the rule.
It now appears that if you run or manage a business, you can face jail time for contacting your employees after hours.
There was never an intention, in my book anyway, for a criminal penalty.
Labor had tried to remove criminal penalties, but the move was blocked by the opposition, which voted against the bill.
For the government to ask the coalition to solve its problems in a bill that is rife with problems is a bit rich.
With 6 months until the laws come in, the government's vowed to have another go. As the Prime Minister seeks to frame Labor's industrial relations reform as a cost of living relief measure for the lower paid, the opposition's signalling a new fight over the proposed national vehicle emissions standards. It's warning that forcing companies to provide more efficient vehicles will drive up prices.
I just don't know how people are going to pay thousands of dollars more.
That's a contested claim, but it's not stopping the opposition.
The Prime Minister is so out of touch that he's now proposing a ute tax and a car tax to make a vehicle more expensive for families.
No accident he chose to deliver that message in the must-win by-election seat of Dunkley. Nicole Hegarty, ABC News, Canberra.
Australia will this year introduce an armed drone into military service, but details of the secretive project are being tightly held by government. Labor's also unveiled a $400 million boost to another larger and more complex program to develop a fleet of uncrewed combat aircraft.
At an undisclosed location, which looks very much like the Woomera testing range, a locally developed combat drone is put through its paces. While in Canberra, Australia's groundbreaking GhostBat program receives a $400 million funding boost.
This technology has the potential to turn a single fighter jet into a fighting team.
First unveiled back in 2019 as the Loyal Wingman, the unmanned MQ-28 harnesses artificial intelligence to target enemies while flying alongside traditional crewed aircraft into battle.
We absolutely understand that manned-unmanned teaming is part of the future of air combat.
Overnight in the United States, a strikingly similar-looking product has just been unveiled. 2 years ago, the former government cancelled an order for American-made armed drones. With the war in Ukraine highlighting the importance of uncrewed systems, there's now a rush to introduce the deadly technology here. And work's underway on a secretive new program.
We are introducing into service an armed drone this year. I won't go into details.
The Minister insists the details must be kept secret for now on security grounds. Andrew Green, ABC News, Canberra.
A large chemical fire at a warehouse in Briana has sparked a toxic smoke alert for nearby residents. The blaze started in a conveyor belt carrying sulphur from a ship to a storage facility at Kwinana Beach. There were no reports of injuries, but the conditions experienced by firefighters were described as horrendous. Because sulphur gives off a noxious gas, residents were warned to stay inside and switch off air conditioners.
The fire itself looked a lot worse than it was when we got here because of the conveyor belt was basically rubber burning, but in amongst that was sulphur dioxide. So we immediately put out warnings to the community to advise them of what was going on.
Firefighters were also kept busy battling a blaze which came dangerously close to homes in Spearwood and Lake Coogee. Flames came within metres of homes on Barrington Street as authorities scrambled to put out spot fires. Water bombers helped contain the blaze. As Western Australians grapple with the heat, the Corrective Services Minister, Paul Papalia, has defended the lack of air conditioning in the state's prisons and detention facilities. The state opposition has labelled it inhumane, arguing the government can afford to spend on air conditioning. But the minister says temperature is regulated in other ways.
Perth's in a heat wave, but Paul Papalia insists people in custody are coping just fine.
A lot of Western Australians don't have air conditioning, so the fact that some prisoners in prison don't have air conditioning isn't a major issue. It's the same as people who don't have air conditioning in their houses.
None of the cells at Casuarina Men's Prison are air conditioned, and many of the cells in its Unit 18 youth facility are also without fans, removed for safety reasons.
People in our prison system are there because the courts have deemed it necessary that they be there. They've offended, they've committed offence, they've harmed other Western Australians, and they've been sentenced to time in prison.
I'm sure all the ministers up in Duma House are sitting in air-conditioned offices. How is it appropriate for another government institution that has those juveniles in it not to have proper air conditioning? It's unacceptable.
Crime and disorder are big problems in this state. They won't be dealt with if we treat people like animals.
Fred Chaney says he's seen more concern expressed for livestock during this heatwave.
You can tell us what the temperature is on a sheep ship. No one's going to tell us what the temperature is in the Roban jail in a heatwave.
In 2022, the government set aside $10 million to install air conditioning in Roburn Regional Prison. The Aboriginal Legal Service asking this week why it's taking so long.
Oh, it's a big project, it's an old prison, and you're talking about a significant infrastructure change. It's underway, the project's underway, and it'll be delivered as fast as it can be.
I think the Premier needs to live up to his lifelong commitment to Aboriginal people and let these relatively straightforward tasks like getting some air conditioning in get dealt with and done.
Air conditioning is due to be installed at Roburn Prison by December. James Carmody, ABC News.
The WA government has confirmed it will reject a plan put forward by 2 Perth councils intended to protect the city's shrinking tree canopies, partly due to pressures it would place on new housing. However, the Planning Minister denies accusations. His decision was swayed by pressure from property developers.
It's another 40-degree scorcher in Perth.
And just to give you an example of that, so pointing at the ground here, just to give us a quick one, 64 degrees. A few metres over here into the shade.
Greens MP Brad Pettit believes it's obvious why Perth needs to become a leafier city. But after initially denying a decision had been made, the state government today scrapped proposals from the Nedlands and South Perth councils to protect mature trees.
And what they've walked away from today, though, is actually doing any action on private land. Over 75% of our trees, of our tree canopy, is on private land.
The new rules were hoped to have been the beginning of statewide measures to protect trees in Australia's least leafy capital.
Ultimately, we have already introduced a range of planning reforms that are either have mandated soft landscaping or facilitated and incentivised tree retention.
The minister rejected assertions he's succumbed to pressure from property developers.
The Nedlands proposal wasn't affecting the big developers. It was actually affecting mums and dads and other households in those low dense areas.
The state government has announced it's working on a broader proposal, but the Mayor of Nedlands argues it won't be enough to save Perth's dwindling canopy. Kason Ho, ABC News.
US President Joe Biden won't face charges over his handling of classified documents. And he has hit back at the investigators' description of him as a well-meaning elderly man with a bad memory.
A hastily arranged national address for a president who was obviously seething.
I know what the hell I'm doing. I've been president. I put this country back on its feet.
He was responding to a new report from a special counsel who says Joe Biden retained classified documents after finishing his term as vice president. But it's the report's assessment of President Biden's faculties which really upset him. It said the 81-year-old's memory seemed hazy and he did not remember when he was vice president nor when his son Beau died.
How in the hell dare he raise that? Frankly, when I was asked the question, I thought to myself, it wasn't any of their damn business. I don't need anyone to remind me when he passed away.
But after insisting his memory was fine, he then seemed to confuse Mexico with Egypt.
The president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in.
Up the road from the White House, the US Supreme Court was hearing arguments about whether the man Joe Biden beat at the last election, Donald Trump, should be allowed to run again. A Colorado court said he couldn't because he was an insurrectionist after inciting the January 6th attack on the US Capitol. His lawyer rejected that argument.
This was a riot. It was not an insurrection. The events were shameful, criminal, violent, all of those things, but it did not qualify as insurrection.
Attention is paid to the type of questions asked by the justices to infer which way they might be leaning. It's more an art than a science, and it is highly subjective. But there was scepticism from some justices that an individual state could determine who could or couldn't run for president under this particular section of the Constitution.
Supreme Court is a beautiful thing to watch in many respects. It's unfortunate that we have to go through a thing like that. I consider it to be more election interference by the Democrats. That's what they're doing.
For Americans, the choice is increasingly likely to be between an alleged insurrectionist and a man described as elderly with a poor memory. It's hard to know which plays worse for voters. Carrington Clark, ABC News, Washington.
Meanwhile, the US president has called Israel's military response in Gaza over the top as he continues to press for an extended pause in fighting. Israel has begun airstrikes on Rafah despite US warnings that any military action in that part of Gaza could be a serious risk to civilians. 2 women and 5 children were among 13 people killed in the overnight attacks. In Victoria, specialist investigators are being brought in as the search for a Ballarat mother stretches into its 6th day. Missing persons detectives have now taken the reins in the investigation into Samantha Murphy's disappearance.
A thin band of orange, the latest line of hope in the search for missing mother Samantha Murphy.
We do hold significant concerns for Samantha's welfare at this stage, and that is growing as the days progress.
After 5 days, the investigation has turned to a new phase.
This morning, the Missing Persons Squad have taken over investigation primacy in relation to the disappearance of Samantha. I can also confirm that we have not identified any suspicious or sinister circumstances.
The 51-year-old was last seen leaving her home on Eureka Street in Ballarat East just after 7 on Sunday morning for a trail run in the Wuwakirung Regional Park, where the search has so far focused. Police say she had her mobile phone and was wearing a watch with GPS tracking.
It's obviously an ongoing inquiry with our telecommunications technicians.
But they remain unsure of the route she took. Today, SES teams set off from Buninyong, south of Ballarat. This is a detailed search through difficult terrain. The bushland can be dense, blocking some of the aerial searches. It's also a very hilly landscape, said to contain dams and mine shafts, meaning it can be difficult to see too far in any one direction. While police will continue the search, late this afternoon, confirmation volunteers will be scaled back.
If the need arises where additional intelligence or information comes in that we need to scale back up, we'll certainly do that.
Ms Murphy's husband, Mick, was seen coming and going from the police station this morning. Yesterday, he and his daughter gave an emotional public appeal.
Mum, we love you so much and we miss you.
and we need you at home with us.
My heart goes out to the family of Samantha Murphy at this incredibly difficult time.
Police are looking into the time leading up to the 51-year-old's disappearance as they open new lines of inquiry.
That'll be a huge part of our investigation, digging into the background, working out Samantha's movements in the days leading up to her disappearance, and also the people that know her.
Jesse Thompson, ABC News, Ballarat.
Russian President Vladimir Putin defended the war in Ukraine and said in a rare TV interview that Moscow has no interest in expanding the conflict. He told former Fox News television host Tucker Carlson that any talk of further invasions was threat-mongering. Mr Putin made the comments during a 2-hour pre-recorded conversation aired on the internet and on Russian state television. Carlson's interview with President Putin coincides with the US Senate continuing to block additional funding to Ukraine.
Do you think NATO is worried about this becoming a global war or a nuclear conflict?
At least that's what they're talking about. And they're trying to intimidate their own population with an imaginary Russian threat.
Queen Camilla has spoken for the first time about her husband King Charles' cancer diagnosis. The Queen gave the update on the monarch's condition while attending a musical event at Salisbury Cathedral, when she said her husband is doing extremely well and is very touched by all of the letters and messages the public have been sending. It's the first time a member of the royal family has given a health update on the King. The Reserve Bank will consider cutting interest rates before inflation comes back to target if the economy looks like it's heading in the right direction. Speaking before a parliamentary committee, Governor Michelle Bullock pushed back against international pressure to lift rates. She said while there are some encouraging signs of cooling, the current inflation rate of 4.1% remains too high, but said they wouldn't wait to cut the cash rate if they needed to.
Do we have to be in the band at 2.5% before we think about doing that? No, I don't believe we do. But we do need to be very confident that we're going to get there.
And now to finance with David Chow.
Even though the Reserve Bank governor has warned interest rates could still rise, the odds are they probably will come down by Christmas. As we heard from Michelle Bullock, the RBA is not expecting to wait until inflation actually falls inside that 2 to 3% target range. After all, her counterparts at the US Federal Reserve have openly said they plan to cut interest rates 3 times this year. So if the world's biggest economy makes such a drastic move, it'll be pretty tough for Australia to go the opposite way. Now, the RBA is worried about services inflation, as too many of us have been getting haircuts and dental checkups, apparently. But economists from Commonwealth Bank reckon we should be focusing more on how inflation is going for essential items, the things we have no choice but to keep buying no matter how high interest rates climb. And 13 rate hikes have done almost nothing when it comes to limiting the price rises for housing, in particular building a new home, rent, electricity and insurance, which is where the government should arguably do more with fiscal policy. Meanwhile, it was a quiet day for the share market, which ended flat as gains in healthcare and property offset losses for uranium stocks. And the All Ords is down 0.6% for the week. Overseas, the S&P 500 crept to a new record high, while Japan hit a 34-year high. And Chinese markets were closed for the Lunar New Year. Oil prices jumped 3% on lingering concerns about Middle East supply disruptions, while the Aussie dollar is buying just under 65 US cents. And that's finance.
Almost 2 years after the collapse of funeral insurer Youpla, the federal government has stepped in to provide support for thousands of First Nations people who lost out. For many, the package marks a win in the long fight for justice. Indigenous Affairs reporter Kirsty Wellauer has the story, and a warning: this report contains images of an Aboriginal person who has died.
2 years ago, Nikki Foy and her mother took up the fight for justice after losing tens of thousands in funeral insurance premiums to the now collapsed Youpla Group.
I'm just really disgusted in how they targeted us. It was targeting vulnerable people, vulnerable communities, you know, across the nation.
While her mother did not survive to see this day, Nikki and her family are now one of 13,000 people who will recoup some of what they lost.
I hope families who are eligible can find some relief in the long-term resolution.
The federal government has announced a $97 million support program.
This is a very important recognition of those that were affected by this so-called Aboriginal Benefits Insurance Scheme.
From July, anyone who held an active policy on or after August 1st, 2015 is eligible for a bond or cash payment. They'll get either 60% of all payments made or the benefit amount of the ACBF certificate, whichever is lower.
I think it's a fair outcome for something that's caused harm to community for decades.
Concerns had been raised about the company for decades, including multiple court challenges by regulators for false and misleading conduct and for breaking anti-hawking laws. Despite this, they were allowed to deduct money from customers' Centrelink accounts for 16 years.
If there was a problem with that company, then the government should have removed them from Centre Pay early, and they didn't.
The government's scheme will run until June 2026, easing some of the pain and suffering. Kirsty Wellauer, ABC News.
It was every homeowner's worst nightmare. A Gold Coast couple discovering they didn't own the house they thought they'd bought at auction 5 years earlier. But after a lengthy legal battle, they've finally been awarded millions in compensation.
Leaving court with a grin from ear to ear and 2 thumbs up. After years of living in limbo, finally resolution.
Incredibly relieved, like it's just been such a long 6 years, and to have that original decision confirmed and unanimously was just enormous.
In 2018, the Moorcrofts bought this Mermaid Beach home at auction for more than $1.2 million. They'd left their life in Victoria to buy a dream home on the Gold Coast, but 5 years after moving in, were told to leave, with the Supreme Court ruling the home still belonged to its previous owner. The woman who had owned the house claimed her signature had been forged on mortgage documents. That eventually led to the sale. She sued the couple to get the house back.
It's just been a constant roller coaster, and you've had to learn a lot along the way, and the stress has been unbelievable at times.
It's just been exhausting, certainly in the last couple of years, particularly when everything seemed to go against us.
Last year, the Supreme Court found the Moorcrofts were also victims of the mortgage fraud and ordered they be paid compensation. The state of Queensland appealed, but today that appeal was dismissed, clearing the way for the couple to receive their $2.7 million payout.
I know that a really good and decent family has, been compensated for an outrage that was perpetrated against them.
The state government can still appeal today's decision to the High Court, but they're hopeful that won't be the case, desperate for this to be the end of nearly 6 years of turmoil.
And we just hope to God it's done.
But for now, celebration is in order.
So I think right now we'll just go have a beer, find a pub somewhere.
Perhaps after that, preparing to find their next dream home. Laura Lavelle, ABC News, Brisbane.
Western Australia is playing an increasingly important role in keeping an eye on celestial threats to our planet. New cameras are being installed in remote and regional towns to help monitor and map meteors that pose potential threats to satellites and astronauts.
Like a scene from Star Wars, flashes pulse across the sky above the regional town of Kojonup. But these aren't lasers, they're meteors captured on camera.
Before these cameras, the state of the art was just to go outside and observe meteors and just report how many you've seen in like a 10-minute block.
Geraldton resident Ken Lawson is one of dozens of citizen scientists, installing security cameras to help map meteors.
When I installed the camera and I started seeing the data rolling in, I was completely and utterly hooked. So I went out and bought 3 new cameras, all the parts, built them up, installed them.
The cameras are part of the expanding global meteor network, helping to map celestial rocks as they fly around our planet.
The Global Meteor Network has over 1,000 meteor cameras in 45 countries around the globe.
The dataset is accessible to anyone, including international space agencies, helping to keep an eye out for potential threats.
We need to have these observations to feed models that NASA uses that estimate impact risks of meteoroids to satellites and astronauts in orbit.
The Perth Observatory is installing 16 more cameras across regional WA.
There's a great opportunity there for people to feel that they've actually been involved in that discovery, to say that, hey, my town, my community has actually contributed to scientific research.
Our country towns are full of curiosity and clear night skies, so it's hoped they'll continue to contribute to what we know about meteors, and at the same time help raise the next generation of astronomers. Jamie Tanu, ABC News.
To sport, and Australia is on track to win the first T20 international against the West Indies after setting the tourists 214 for victory in Hobart. A blistering 70 from David Warner in his 100th international T20 set the foundation for Australia, with Tim David adding an unbeaten 37 from 17 balls. The West Indies made a fast start to the chase, Brandon Chase blasting 53 off 37 balls, while Johnson Charles made 42. But quick wickets slowed the tourists' momentum, setting up a tight finish. Australia has added fast bowler Michael Neser to an otherwise unchanged Test cricket squad for the tour of New Zealand at the end of the month. Neser was last year's Sheffield Shield Player of the Year, but is down on his usual output this season, taking just 9 wickets in 2 tests. He was included after West Australian quick Lance Morris was ruled out through injury. The rest of the squad remains intact from the home series against Pakistan and the West Indies, with Steve Smith opening and Cam Green to stay at 4.
We think he's super talented. There's a skill set there that's unbelievable across all 3 formats. Like any player, I don't think it's going to be a straight line. I think there'll be fluctuations throughout, as there always is.
Perth Glory has conceded a last-gasp goal to draw 3-3 with Adelaide United in Adelaide. The Reds were in complete control in the opening 15 minutes, going 2-0 up. Perth hit back on the half-hour mark through Adam Taggart and then levelled things up when David Williams smashed one home midway through the second half. The comeback was completed when Josh Rawlins finished off an attacking move with 8 minutes left, but Adelaide had a final chance, sneaking the ball over the line with virtually the last action of the match. The Australian Opals have taken a big step towards the Paris Olympics with a 60 to 55 point win over host nation Brazil in a qualifying tournament. Lauren Jackson, who is chasing her 5th Olympic campaign at 42, played more than 8 minutes and added a 3-pointer early on. Australia led by as many as 14 points in the second half before hanging on in a tense finish. WNBA forward Easy Magbigor scored 18 points to go with 7 rebounds. The Opals face Germany and Serbia next and need to only avoid finishing bottom of the 4-team group to qualify for the Olympics. Taking a look at the weather now, and it was a very hot one for the city and across much of Western WA, with some more heat ahead amid this heat wave. Right now in town it's still 37 degrees and humidity is 11%. Perth dropped to about 20 degrees at 2:30 this morning, rising to a top of 42 degrees at 1:20 this afternoon. The state's lowest overnight minimum was 7 degrees, recorded down at Ayr. The state's highest maximum also reached in southern and central parts today. Shark Bay, Geraldton and Pearce, the RAAF base there about 45 kilometres northeast of Perth, all hitting a top of 45 degrees today. Cloud bubbling over the north with a trough is bringing an increasing number of showers and thunderstorms. Skies otherwise largely clear with hot and dry winds and high pressure. On the synoptic, a heat trough down the west coast will remain during tomorrow before the southern section moves inland on Sunday, bringing a bit of a reprieve from the severe heat for coastal parts. Taking a quick look around the country tomorrow, sunny in Adelaide, partly cloudy days set for Melbourne, Hobart and Canberra. Showers for Sydney and Brisbane, with showers and a possible storm set for Darwin. Back to WA, and in the north, showers and gusty thunderstorms over northern and eastern parts of the Kimberley. Chance of afternoon and evening thunderstorms over the remaining Kimberley and inland western parts of the Pilbara. Very hot over the West Kimberley, Pilbara and western Gascoyne. Windy in the morning over inland parts of the Gascoyne, North Interior and Central West. Very hot across much of the Southwest Land Division. In Perth, sunny tomorrow, a top of 41 degrees after an overnight low of 24. Sunrise will be at 11 minutes to 6, setting at 12 minutes past 7. And looking ahead, cooling off a bit for Sunday, a top of 35 degrees. Cooler again for Monday, 33, before heating up with a couple more high 30 days set for mid next week. And that's ABC News for now. I'll be back with you tomorrow. In the meantime, you can stay up to date with ABC News Online, or you can catch the news anytime on ABC iView. It's been a pleasure having your company. Take care and good night.